Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you are having a fantastic day if you are watching this live. And if you are watching this on our YouTube channel, happy afternoon, morning, evening, middle of the night, whatever it is. So glad to have you. And you'll notice it looks a little different today because I have my first guest during this series, Ellen Rogin. Hi, Ellen. How are you?
I'm great. Good to be here. Thank you.
It's so good to have you. And it's so good to have this bit of an experiment. So hopefully all of the technology gods will be smiling on us as we go through our time here today. And because we have a guest, I'm going to dive right in. Of course, want to remind everybody, if you do want to see all of the other series that we've done, make sure you take a look at our YouTube channel where I've got all of the recordings of our past episodes. But enough of that. Ellen, this month we're talking about ways that financial service providers can be better sales Sherpas for their prospects, for their clients, ways that they can really be that trusted advisor that they often say they are. And you are one of my favorite people to talk to about the topic of mindfulness, which is often not considered a very businessy topic, but it so is. And so I guess the place I wanted to start our conversation was when you think about bringing mindfulness into the advisor space and into the conversations that advisors are having with their prospects and clients, what does that look like to you? What does that mean?
Well, I want to start by just defining what mindfulness is, because many of you may have heard the term.
Probably a
and
good
like,
idea.
Is that a meditation thing? Like, what is that? I hear it. Is it just in a yoga studio? One of my favorite definitions, or the easiest definition that I've seen, is just to be aware, to notice. And if you think about a sales conversation, one of the most generous things you can do with a client or a prospect is to really be there for them, to be giving them your full attention, to be totally aware of what's going on for them in that moment. I can't think of anything more important. Yet, as you know, I mean, being the sales guru that you are, that often people are focused on like many other things than besides what the person across from the table is saying to them, or across from the screen, as we're dealing with now.
Right. I know it's something I say even outside of the sales context, but it's so often that we ask a question and then instead of listening to the response, we actually immediately start to think about the next thing we want to say, right? Or if somebody's, they say something that triggers an idea, we don't pay attention to anything else until they'll shut up and we can start talking again, right?
I think when you said that, I was thinking about when someone tells you you're meeting someone and they tell you their name, and immediately we forget that, right? Like, wait, what was your name again? And now, at least on video, usually the person's name is at the bottom, or if you're in a networking event, they're hopefully wearing a name tag. But that's the easiest example I can think of how we're really not listening to somebody. And 100% that we're worried about, like, okay, what am I going to say next? Like what? Or how can I mean, the worst case scenario is like, how am I going to up this or impress them from what I'm going to say, instead of just really being there with the person that you're talking with?
Yeah. And it's not easy. I mean, I know that I often fall into that trap, even just talking with a networking partner or maybe an existing client. In fact, I know this happened to me the other day where I was talking with somebody who had been a client of mine in the past, and, maybe I'd love for them to be clients in the future. And they said, he said something. I was talking with a gentleman, he said something, and I so wanted to jump on and go, oh yeah, I totally agree. And as you said, impress him. But it was, I was like, okay, shut up. just let that, you'll come back to it and get present again. So it's not an easy thing to do, right? You kind of have to keep reminding yourself.
Yeah. And there's, I think, little tricks that you can use to help with this. One is to just come with the energy that this person is fascinating and you're so curious. And sometimes they're not, right? we hope they actually are. And I'm not saying to BS them or be inauthentic, but there's some way you can be really curious about what they say. And it's going to feel so good for the recipient to feel like they're actually being heard, because it happens so infrequently these days.
I love what you say. Even if they're not that fascinating, at least go with the energy that they are fascinating. I think that a lot of times people, um, they manifest the expectation you have of them, right? So if you go in with that energy of, oh, this person's going to be a dud, then they're going to be a dud. And conversely, if you're like, hey, there's something that's interesting about this person, I'm going to pay super close attention, a lot of times they'll respond, right?
Yeah. And part of this also is trusting yourself that you will have the response. Because I think
Mm,
sometimes
yeah.
people want to jump in, not because they're in it just trying to impress, but they're like, okay, but I'm worried I'm not going to know the right thing to say. And just trust that you will. And even
Yeah.
if you don't, you could use a filler that will still make them feel heard, like, wow, tell me more about that. Till you do know the right thing to say.
Right. Or sometimes going, wow, that's an interesting conundrum. I don't know how to respond to that. Like, tell me more. Like, why did that happen? As opposed to just faking it, right?
100%. That's beautiful. Like, wouldn't you feel if someone said that to me, I'd feel like what I had to say was important and they were really listening. I remember having lunch with someone I hadn't seen in many years. And the entire lunch she spent filling me in on her life over the last maybe 10 years since I'd seen her. And I was interested. I like this
Mhm.
person. I think she talked 90% of the time. At the end of the lunch, she said to me, Ellen, this was so great. I had such a great conversation with you.
Yeah.
It's like,
I
okay.
yeah, I love when that happened. I've had people call me a great conversationalist, and I'm like, yeah, I didn't say anything. But I mean, we laugh, but that's actually true. So often we want somebody to just listen to us. I was talking about this in a sales class lately, very much around kind of the hardcore mechanics of selling. And I was like, discovery questions, which we use to uncover needs and opportunities. One of the biggest things they do is just let the other person be heard. And right, if you think about how often we go through our days having people take an interest in us, it's pretty rare, right? And so I think something you even intuited at the beginning of this is this idea of it's a gift, right? Like when you focus on that other person.
And here's the other way that it ends up helping you, besides building a deeper relationship, especially for people in financial services, you're usually communicating something that's either technically confusing or
Hmm.
maybe really stressful from the people you're across the table with. If you
Right.
allow them to share what's going on, really deeply listen. There's a woman I know, Marsha Martin, who calls this allowing them to empty, where then
Oh,
they've
love
got it
that.
all out. Then when it's your turn, they'll actually be able to hear your good advice and really
Right.
have it land. And so you're creating that. It's like you're setting the table to allow them to really hear your good advice, because it's frustrating
Mhm.
sometimes. You have advice that's really going to help people, but they just don't listen. So you have to set the stage for them to do that.
Right. Well, and I think you make a great point about specifically the conversations that you will have with someone about money, whether or not it's even stressful, it is going to be emotionally fraught, right? When you're talking about either the excitement of the future or the challenges or whatever it might be, you know, people usually have some emotional connection with finances. So I love that idea of just let them talk, let them empty it out, let them get that emotional stuff out there. Either they're going to feel better and you can just move forward, or at least right? You know what you're managing in that conversation.
Yeah, it's really recon work to deeply listen to someone. Then when it is your turn to speak, how to focus
Mm,
on things that are going to affect them the most. So this is really kind of mindfulness in action. It's really being
I love
so
that.
present with someone that you can do your best to serve them.
That's fantastic. One thing that I often tell people, and I want to ask you about some specific suggestions for tools, but one thing that I work on, and I'm actually really bad at it, which is why I'm working on it. They call it a practice for a reason, is the idea of letting somebody say something and then pausing for a second,
Mm.
right? Even just stopping and taking that breath to digest like what they've said and then go, am I, responding in the right way? Am I responding to them or just saying what I was going to say no matter what they said? Are there any other tools or ways that we can kind of bring that presence and that awareness into the conversations?
Yes, and what I would say is when you catch yourself, part of being having a meditative practice or a mindfulness practice, and I know you know this, is when you catch yourself with your mind drifting, bringing it back. That's actually the work. It's not,
Right.
I had an advisor say to me the other day, like, I tried meditation, but you just sit there with like no thoughts. I'm like, no one can do that unless they're a monk sitting in a cave somewhere. That's what our
Right,
minds
right.
do, is have thoughts. But it's as your mind wanders to go, oh,
Mhm.
I need to be back here, is to notice that. So sometimes
Right.
even grounding yourself with like a physical grounding, like noticing your feet on the ground. Or one I've been playing with lately is, and no one would notice I'm doing this unless I'm like in front of the camera like that, but just putting my hands together and just feeling, okay, what's that sensation like?
I love
And
that.
just, yes, I've left for a minute, but I'm doing it to get me present again. So there's lots of little micro practices that we can use like this to get us back being present. Another
Mhm.
one is to have a visual cue of noticing something you hadn't noticed before, whether it's about that person,
Mm.
like, oh, you're wearing a plaid shirt. I didn't actually notice that
Right,
before.
right, right.
Or the environment that you're in. Even if you're in an environment, your office that you've been in thousands of times,
Mhm.
my guess is if you look around, you'll notice something that you had never noticed or you haven't noticed in years. And that
Right.
again brings you right back to this moment.
Yeah, I think that's great. One thing I've seen and suggested to others is actually if you do have kind of a set conversation structure, like let's say you are going to meet with a client for their annual review, or maybe it's a prospective client and you're kind of having that introductory conversation with them, having something literally in the material that you're using or the notes you're taking that's like a reminder, you know, even if it's just a little note somewhere that says, hey, remember to do blank, or hey, breathe for a second. Because I think you're right on, and it's one of the biggest mistakes that I see and hear from people is they think that mindfulness is this zen clarity, and really it's just about the repetitive process of straying, coming back, uh, and trying to make that happen faster, right?
Yeah, and that's the bicep curl of mindfulness. That's where the more you practice it, the
Love
easier
it.
it becomes to do that. And,
Oh, that's great.
I'll catch myself. I've been doing this for a while now. And in a stressful moment, all of a sudden I'll take a deep breath. And I'm not even like that conscious that I'm doing it, but I know that is very calming. And
Hmm.
just even the process, breathing is so interesting, right? We do it automatically, and you can do it deliberately and
Right.
consciously. The practice I'm playing with now is just breathing through my nose instead of my mouth. It's supposed to be
Okay.
better for you, for your physiologically.
Okay.
It also has me having to be more mindful because it's not what I normally do.
Right.
So there's in a moment in a meeting, no one's going to notice that you're deliberately breathing versus regularly breathing. So it's another just easy thing that you can put in. And I do want to make sure, because I don't hear people talking about this a lot, but when I had originally read this, it made such an impact for me, is you can also bring mindfulness into your written communication with people. So how often have you
Okay.
typed a quick email, sent it off, and not reread it? And I'm not just talking about for
Mm.
typos, because of course that's important. You don't want to give a bad impression. But if it's a more important email, or even if it's not, to just reread it and ask, how is this going to be received on the other end? And just be
Love
a
it.
little bit more mindful in that way as well. And there's no way that extra 30 seconds is ever going to hurt you. And it could probably could even save a relationship if you have the wrong word in there, because people interpret things differently.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And even I think about people that communicate regularly through email or other written communication, just asking yourself, how are they going to read this? Even if it's not a incredibly negative or critical email, some of the worst impacts I've seen from written communication, like an email, have often come from an email that the sender probably just didn't even think about. Like they weren't trying to be like, oh, you're doing a horrible job, or this is so not right. It was just like, oh, I gotta send this off really quick. But the recipient was like, whoa, hold on a second. So yeah, I love that idea. 30 seconds, it's 15 sometimes to just pause, go back to the top, catch those weird typos for sure, but also make sure your intent is, you can't know how the other person's going to take it, but yeah, just try to make sure the intent is in the right place. I love that. Obviously, we can keep talking about this. We have many times. By the way, if you're enjoying this conversation, you should definitely check out the Beer, Beats, and Business podcast that I have. Ellen was a guest on. I think it was last season, but if you go to beerbeatsandbusiness.com, you can definitely listen to that conversation. And Ellen, what's a good way for somebody to follow up with you if they want to continue the conversation? Can they just shoot you a message here on LinkedIn?
LinkedIn's great. I'd love to connect there. You can also go to ellenrogin.com, and there's all sorts of stuff there. So I'd love to connect.
Awesome. Well, everybody, we took an extra 2 minutes because this material is so important, and I wanted to make sure Ellen got a chance to share her great ideas with us. We are going to be back next week, Monday through Thursday at noon. Please join us. If you know anybody in the financial services space, please share this with them so that we can get as many people on as possible. And other than that, thanks so much. Have a great day. Bye.